welcome to Conversations with Therapists. We're here today with, I'm super excited, with Yael Eiserike. She is an attorney turned therapist, and I'm really excited to talk to you. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So Yael is a licensed clinical social worker practicing in Los Angeles, and she specializes in working with high-stress professionals working through career changes, especially those in the attorney field, and then struggling with that work-life balance because she is a former attorney, so she kind of knows that. And then her goal is to help ease that stress quickly because I know that they're in high-stress jobs that, it would benefit them to kind of tone that down, I think, pretty quickly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm excited
Absolutely.
to kind of talk more about that. You're our first and only so far lawyer turned therapist, and I'm like,
Fantastic.
I don't know why I just did that little shoulder shimmy, but we're gonna go with it. Okay, so Jennifer, you got the first one.
All right. So right off the bat, I have to ask, lawyer to therapist, how did it happen?
So, if you knew me in college, it would make perfect sense. I double majored in political science and psychology, and I was always between the two fields. And I opted to go to law because it felt fancier and more prestigious and like a thing I should do. And I did. And I worked with great people. I worked at a great firm. But I was deeply unhappy. There wasn't really anything about that I felt like, oh, this is my place. I'm doing what I was meant to do. By nature, I think I'm much more collaborative than I am adversarial, which now obviously makes sense as to why it wasn't a good fit for me, but real tough when you're doing litigation. And I just couldn't figure out how to make it work for me. I thought about switching firms and doing maybe other types of law, and ultimately landed on the fact that I just wanted to be in a career where I was helping people. I was really collaborating with people. I wasn't kind of, battling against anybody. And when I reflected on it, I sort of said, I kind of have to scrap the whole thing and go back to school. And so I did. And I've been a therapist much longer than I was a lawyer, and never once sort of questioned it, never second guessed it. Sort of, this is the right spot for me. I realized I was unhappy about a year and a half in. I
Oh wow.
ultimately practiced for about 3 years, but it took me a little bit to figure out, to really be honest and say, this just isn't working for me.
Yeah. So how did you go from that and like did you take some time off to kind of look at some other career options? No, you just
No. So I had a case that went up to trial in Northern California, and at the time I was training for the LA Marathon and was really insistent on being back in LA for my Saturday morning runs. And so I would drive from SoCal to NorCal, up and back.
oh my
And the
gosh.
trial lasted, I believe, for about 6 weeks. And so I had a lot of quiet reflection time in my car back in the days of no podcasts or anything, and just a lot of time to think, a lot of time to kind of look at myself, look at my life, look at what I was doing. And it was in those drives that I realized I'm not happy. I'm not, and I'm at trial. This is the most exciting. This is
Yeah.
supposed to be the pinnacle. And I just don't like it. There's not the part of it I like is all of the, hey, let's talk to the client, let's interview witnesses, let's spend time with people.
Yeah. That's so interesting.
Well, it's interesting to me because now you work with really high stress professionals, which is
Mhm.
really interesting that you left it and then you wanted to continue to work with the professionals that you kind of.
When did you make that decision? Were you still in school? Because I know you went back, so you had.
So I went back to school. I sort of made a real full swing in the other direction. I worked in community mental health for many years, loved the work. I worked with children and families, so totally different population, but had always this nagging sort of thing of like, this part of my life that was really significant for me hasn't been used, and I don't know how to bring it together. And so for a minute I thought about, oh, I could do mediation, but I realized, no, I don't want to really work with families that are in high conflict divorce, or anything like that. I mean, some people do, and fabulous. I'm glad that there's folks
Yeah,
who enjoy
somebody's
it.
got to do
Not
it, but
not for me. And so when I made the switch into private practice, it just naturally fit together. And it's funny because there's no way I could have predicted ending up where I am now. And now that I have sort of those years behind me, it was inevitable. There was no other way for it to all come together.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so interesting. My father's an attorney, and I could honestly not get my head around the fact that he could ever be anything other than an attorney. Like, it's just,
Well, and here's the thing, I don't think I am not an attorney. I just don't practice. So I'm inactive with the California bar, but I still pay dues every year. I'm still in good standing. But I will never not know how to think that way. I will never lose my writing skills or my analytical skills. I'm sure they're not as sharp as they once were. I'm not reading case law all the time or really ever, but I
aren't you
think
excited about that though?
You're
I
not
would be
seeing your
excited.
clients and being like, well, precedent says. Da, 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 da,
Right.
da.
But it's interesting because I think that actually fit nicely into cognitive behavioral therapy, which is so uses so much Socratic questioning, is very pragmatic, and it was just all the things converged beautifully. And so when I work with lawyers, one of the things that many of them have told me is that they don't have to explain their world to me.
Oh, yeah.
So I understand what billing means. When a client tells me, "Oh, I billed X number of hours this month or this year or this week," I know what that means in a visceral way. So if I have a client who tells me I had a 300-hour month, I immediately know what that means. They don't need to explain it, break it down for me because, by the way, for those of you who aren't lawyers, for most lawyers, it's roughly about 80% of your time is billable. So if you imagine that they billed 300 hours, that's only 80% of the hours that they worked in
Oh
a
my
month.
God. That's
And
disgusting.
if you
That
divide
makes
that by
sense.
4,
I would imagine compared to other types of clients and other niches too, that these are professionals who are very conscious of their time, conscious of you wasting their time as well. And they might be approaching therapy different than other clients in other fields.
Yeah. Have you noticed that? I guess it's good that you did that kind of like that space in between where you weren't working with lawyers to kind of know, like, I don't know. I lost my train of thought with that, but like it helped. I think it could help bridge that gap.
yeah. Well, and because it's interesting, I think having worked with kids, it was so foundational for the way I approach and conceptualize people because so much of who we are as adults really has to do with our experiences as children. And so I think I kind of blend a lot of that sort of, oh, let's understand why we're doing these things, but in a very sort of intentional, focused way. So if somebody comes and sees me and they're having, panic attacks, or they have a big presentation, or there's something really pressing or imminent, we're not going to talk about like, oh, this thing that happened to you a million years ago that certainly is impacting how you're feeling now, but we're going to talk about what are the skills, what are the strategies, what are the things you need to put in place today. Like, let's put a band-aid on it first. That
Yeah.
isn't sufficient. That's not going to be the only thing we do, but let's at least just put a band-aid on it short term, and then we can go back into exploring maybe why these patterns are happening.
Yeah.
Now, we talked to another therapist recently who works with high level executive women or women in demanding careers, but she was saying she had this one client who was literally trying to time her anxiety attacks around speaking engagements she was doing. So she'd be like on for 5 minutes and like attack like in the middle. And that's how she entered like the field, or she like and really got into her content, where she was like, why are we doing this?
Right. Absolutely.
So is
Absolutely.
CBT your main modality?
It is the framework I use. I wouldn't say it's entirely so there's things I really like about CBT. I think sometimes it gets a bad rep for being sort of superficial and sort of too narrow, too skills focused. I
Mhm.
certainly pull those things from it, but that's not exclusively what I do. So with all of my sessions, I set an agenda with clients. I find that for a lot of people, having an agenda feels, again, that intentionality with time and focus. And so it's not the meandering, like, oh, how was your week? Maybe we land on something, maybe we don't. And because it's a collaborative process, I can sometimes help people figure out, like, what is the thing we really need to talk about today? And sometimes it's what they bring and sometimes it's not, and that's okay because we work together on that. And I assign homework. without fail, every client, every session. I always assign homework.
Literally going to be my next question. Are you a
Always.
homework therapist?
Well, I remember,
Always.
so we helped you do your website a couple months or oh my gosh, a while ago now.
Almost a year ago.
I remember like
Wow.
when I did like some of the content was like I always assign homework and I'm like that's what everybody needs. Like I liked putting that
I
in
love homework.
because
I
it's
don't-
so easy to like go to a session, I feel like, and then just like
drop off.
kind of put everything in that session and then you're like, okay, I'm done. And now I have to go back to life and we'll circle back at the next session.
It doesn't really, you don't really, to me, it's wasted opportunity as a therapist, because if you have a session and we talk about, let's say your coworker is doing this thing that you don't like and it's upsetting you, and we understand kind of what's happening, what are you thinking about, maybe what you can do. We talk about maybe some patterns and triggers. We talk about all those things in session. If you don't do anything differently and next week you're going to come in and tell me about that same coworker, like therapy's not really going to do that much for you.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's just, really significant real estate that isn't being utilized if you don't assign homework. So, for me, homework is not worksheets. It's not readings unless somebody really wants it. Mostly people don't. They read and, do that kind of work all the time anyway.
Here's your
And
principal
so,
worksheet. I could totally, I would cringe if somebody gave
the
me that.
checklist
Yeah.
created in Canva.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I will usually, it'll be just the natural outgrowth of the session. So if
Yeah.
somebody comes in and says, oh yeah, my coworker, we had this thing, it was really uncomfortable, blah, blah, blah. The homework might be, well, talk to your coworker about it. Or it's like, talk to your supervisor about it, or come up with a list of ways to avoid the coworker, or whatever makes sense for you. And then at the beginning of the next session, part of the check-in, part of the initial top of the session is, hey, how was homework this week?
Yeah.
It went well, great. It didn't go well. Okay, well, what happened? Oh, you didn't do it. What got in the way? So it's that accountability that and sort of challenge that I think is also really important in therapy.
Yeah, I think you're right. So I want to talk about you have this niche. You kind of got into it after you did your other stuff, your interim thing, we'll call it that. But do you find that a lot of people in your profession have a hard time getting into a niche?
Yeah, I think what I see, and this is when I used to do more direct supervision, is that newer associates, newer therapists were still developing their own clinical voice, which I think is in parallel to figuring out who you want to work with and who wants to work with you, because it's a matter of sort of being honest about who you are and who you aren't as a
Yeah.
therapist.
Do you
So if
feel like
somebody,
oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, do you think like a new therapist, because you mentioned you've done clinical supervision, do you think that they like fresh out of school can even really find that niche immediately, or do you feel like they need to have that kind of trial and error period, I guess? Oh, sorry.
Both. I think certainly when I've seen clinicians that come into this as a second career, they tend to have more of a sense of who they are and who they aren't, what they want to do and what they don't want to do. And that's fine. I think supervision is a wonderful time to explore that in terms of, oh, I have a lot of dread every time I'm going to go see this one client. Okay, well, guess what? There's other therapists who love working with this type of client.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And I think if you genuinely enjoy working with whatever type of population you enjoy working with, that also translates to your enthusiasm and their enthusiasm in working with you. And what I find is that greener therapists, particularly, sort of want to work with everybody, which I think is great to try, have trial and error. But if you're trying to have a sense of this is who I am as a therapist, if you work with everybody, then ultimately sort of work with nobody because you don't sort of stand out as having any kind of expertise.
It is. It's our favorite tagline. And it's really hard for some therapists. And yes, I'll say the young therapists we've had this issue with, but we've had a lot more pushback with therapists that have been in the game for a long time that are just like, I can't do it. I can't niche. Like it just like I won't see people. I can't just see the same people over time. And it's that confusing, like you're not going to, but like I can't guarantee that you're not going to see primarily people.
Right. Well, so it's really interesting. A lot of people, I mean, I don't exclusively work with lawyers, although I certainly have a higher percentage of my caseload as attorneys than not. But I work with other people in lots of different other careers that have similar types of demands and expectations, and really the job, at least in my experience, is just the entry point to doing the work.
Right.
So a lot of folks who have difficulty saying no at work have difficulty saying no to their partners and their families and their kids and all the other parts of their life. And the job, frankly, is the easiest place to start. It's much easier. I call it like that's like JV level stuff. But saying no to your family, that's varsity level stuff.
Yeah.
Like, we'll
That's
work to
so
that.
hard.
Yeah,
It's
it
so
makes
much
sense.
harder because you're living with them. You can't just like close the door
Exactly.
down at a certain time of day and you leave. You're going home to them. So I do want to talk about, you do see primarily attorneys, but what are your other specialties?
Yeah, I mean, I work with,
Because you're in LA, so
I am in LA. I do have clients all over California, and I'm also licensed in Washington, D.C.
were you an attorney in Washington, D.C.? No? Oh, okay.
I have family on the East Coast in the DC suburbs, and I've spent a lot of time there. It was the if life had been different where I would have lived place.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so interesting because I have had really lovely, like, I've had a lot of really great clients. I have a significant part of my caseload now from DC. I think that's where my people are.
Yeah.
Ah, I love
A
what
lot
you
of
said,
lawyers, a lot of government, a lot of law adjacent type folks.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but primarily like pretty high stress, right? High stress levels.
High stress jobs that don't innately have boundaries, a lot of anxiety, a lot of difficulty saying no, a lot of people pleasing. These are kinds of,
addiction.
I'm sorry?
Addiction.
I typically screen out for that when it's too significant, because
Mm.
if that's the case, I'm not, once a week telehealth is probably not the best
Right. They
fit.
need more.
But I do see some substance use and some body image, food, disordered eating stuff.
Oh, yeah. Huh.
Because when you think about sort of high achieving, perfectionistic kind of folks, you can see how those things kind of fit into it. Again, I screen out if it's something that is more, that's a level that I don't feel comfortable with, and then I'll just provide referrals, because there's nothing worse than having a therapeutic relationship start and then have it be obvious that, oh, you need more than what I can give you. Here you go.
This was not going to be my next question, but you mentioned referrals to other therapists. So do you have a vast network of other people that you can refer to? Like if it is something that you're just like, nope, I'm not touching that, that's definitely a specialist who focuses primarily on that or whatever. And then how do you find those people if you are like
Yeah,
in
so if it's not somebody I immediately know, I will ask sort of trusted colleagues who may know somebody, do you have any names, whatnot, and I'll provide that. Because my therapist contacts in DC are more limited, so any
Mhm.
DC therapist I'd love to connect. I do have just a handful of folks I refer out to there, and I've gone on to Psychology Today myself and looked as well and provided referrals, because even if it's just an inquiry call, it's not even a current client. I think just good practice, good care is somebody's feeling vulnerable enough to reach out, to at least give them something. So if it's not working with me, at least here's some names of folks who might be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's really, I mean, I think it's another part of marketing necessarily that people don't think of in the therapy world because, again, you're telehealth, so you're not going into an office, you're not building those connections, but it's so important to find ways to kind of build those connections because even though you may be
Absolutely.
losing a client, you're just kind of building a referral network for somebody who can do that specific part of the job in a way that you're not
Exactly.
ready for or you don't want to be ready for.
Exactly. Or I've had folks reach out who want to do couples therapy. I don't do couples therapy. I love working with individuals. I haven't been bored of it yet. Maybe if I do down the road, I'll do couples, but I love doing individual therapy, and I would much rather refer to somebody who loves doing couples therapy to provide them that care. And if down the road they want to have individual therapy, they can, fine, great, no problem.
So, did you have any distinctive challenges to build your private practice and really like get into this niche and develop this ideal client for yourself?
again, I think I was lucky in that I have this kind of lived experience that very quickly translated to it. But I do remember when I first started, a lot of my clinical work was with kids. I had worked with adults, but I had done a lot of work with kids. And I remember when I first started, I thought about, well, I mean, I could do work with kids. And then I sort of told myself, self, can you, but do you want to?
Yeah.
That's cool.
It's good that you didn't just keep gaslighting yourself into that. Like, this is fine. I like it. I like it. When really it's like, I don't love it.
I feel like
I,
therapists skip that step a lot too, because the idea of assessing yourself and really understanding a unique value that you bring that other people don't bring, and then if it's also something you love, building your business on that is I mean flawless. If
Yeah.
yeah,
It
doing what
can
other people can't do or having what other people don't have, like your experience, is success on its own.
and the reality is, I don't have dread about seeing my clients. I go on vacation and I enjoy my time away, and then I enjoy coming back like, oh, what happened with this thing? Oh, you were gonna go to this interview, and I look forward to coming back. And so I think the intake call, that inquiry call, is so, so, so important. You
Yeah.
would ask me about challenges before. I wouldn't say this is necessarily a marketing challenge per se, but just something for me that I had an obstacle with at first, was that I had a couple of inquiries where I didn't really want to work with the person, but maybe, but kind of, but I should. I don't have a full caseload. And I remember thankfully getting some good guidance and support in just say no, it's okay, because I think everybody should work with a therapist that is excited to work with them, and not just because they have availability on their caseload.
Yeah.
That and so saying no, and having that kind of abundance mindset that, you know what, it's all good. Somebody else will come along that will be a better fit, and feeling empowered to be able to say no.
So that kind of like I thought about this other question. Since you are working with like high stress individuals, I want to talk about the fact that you're teletherapy and what that does for them. Like, is that beneficial for them because they don't have to drive?
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I
Yeah.
mean, I it's interesting because one, they don't have to drive, they don't have to park, there's no traffic, and two, because I work in two different time zones, my afternoon slots in LA are actually after work slots on the East Coast, so that's just an added bonus. But three, depending on why the person wants to be in therapy, I have a client who I routinely see in her car parked outside of her home, because she wants to talk about her work. So she's not going to have sessions in the office. She wants to talk about stuff going on at home. She's not going to do it at home. So
Right.
this is her private space. It's where she feels comfortable. It's her chosen space. And it's great because it doesn't have to be this kind of random office. And especially if you're, sharing a space with other therapists, things might look different. The cushions might change. Like, it's just kind of a random outside office. This is a place that's chosen. People, I think, really feel comfortable, and it is efficient in terms of their time.
It
They
is.
can invest in a 50-minute session once a week versus the 3 hours of driving and parking and making sure you're not late, and then sitting in rush hour and then driving back, because that's a huge time commitment.
It is. And like even here, I mean, we're not LA traffic by any means, but like for us, there are certain points of the day when you would leave to go like outside of our little town bubble, and it can take you 40 minutes to get
Totally.
to like the next town, and then you're exhausted and you get to your shopping destination or your whatever, and you're like,
It was already a quarter of the
I
day.
don't want to be here. And now I have 35 minutes before I have to go get my kids from whatever they're at.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So on that same topic, do you also have, I know that these are people that are probably like, my time is so valuable, I don't have a ton of time. Do they graduate from therapy? Do you kind of, are there like expected,
Stepping
like
stones.
this person's probably a 6-weeker? I mean, that's ridiculous, but like,
Six-weeker.
they kind of like,
So So it's interesting when some people, when they have that inquiry call, will ask me like, well, so how long does this take?
Yeah, I was gonna ask that because the people that are in that profession are like,
Yeah.
they
And
want,
I give
And
them
they're
the
used to mapping out from A
lawyer
to
answer.
B, and you have a journey.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, and I give them the infuriating lawyer answer of, as long as it needs to take, it depends on you. So I love working with panic disorder, for example, because it's something that as a therapist is relatively treatable, but as a client is like debilitating and horrible.
yeah,
And so it to me, it's like a relatively like, okay, we can do these things. I work with insomnia, and that's also a very sort of product short term, brief kind of thing. And so I've had people say, can I work on just this?
yeah,
Great, no
sure,
problem. That's fine. More often than not, in the working on those things, they're like, well, but then there's this other thing. I'm having trouble with this friend or with my partner or with my boss. Fine. Okay. And in turn, because I'm out of network, that also is a big factor, is that it helps because frequency can be determined based on clinical need and not based on insurance protocols or whatever, whatever system they use. So I have clients who I saw once a week and they were doing better. And then I saw them every other week. That made sense. And then I saw them once a month. And then something happened and we could see each other once a week for a period of time, and so we can shift that. So based on whatever makes sense.
yeah,
And so it's really responsive to the client needs. I've had clients who have ended, and then because I have their life in my head, have come back, and that's fine. It's again, to me, this is just using whatever's clinically indicated rather than, well, you get 8 sessions and that's it. Good
you're
luck.
done.
You're
Bye.
done.
You graduate. Here's your sticker, or here's your
I think it's
thing.
amazing too how therapists can actually go from client to client. I imagine, I just imagine all of therapists as being people that can read a quarter of a book and then like start reading another book and then start reading another one and then go to the other one. And it like gives me anxiety because I'd be like, I have to finish this book first before I can go on to the next one. But you're like waiting whole 3 weeks, 4 weeks to find the next.
To like get to the next part of
next,
the
Yeah.
picture.
I know that would kill me.
I never thought about it that way. Maybe using that same metaphor, I would say, while I'm reading book A, I'm only reading book A and I'm present in book A. And then when I put it down and I start book B, I'm only reading book B and I'm not thinking about book A because I'm thinking about book B.
I think that's amazing. I think
It's like your brain is cataloging.
yeah, like you have
Yeah.
file cabinets in your brain. Mine just looks like garbage.
I will say it is, I'm very grateful for, I've had wonderful supervision and I still do consultation groups and I have support with colleagues and everything to help do that. But certainly there have been clients where, even clients that I've long since terminated with, that I'll still occasionally think about, like, I wonder how they're doing. And especially because my early work was with children, and now I'm like, oh, they're adults. Like in my mind, she'll
They're
always
still
be
little
12,
kids.
but no, she's not
Now they're
anymore.
coming to see you because they're in high-powered jobs and they're stressed out.
So you
Perhaps.
talked about these different time zones now too, and the different types of clients and their urgency and panic attacks and things. What are your own boundaries that you establish for your work hours and your workload and obviously your mental health?
Yeah, and I think this is one of the many reasons that having kids is great, because they also require that you be present and very present focused.
Hmm.
And so I have strict hours based on my kids' schedule, my family obligations. Certainly I'm not going to say I've never had a session outside of those times, but it's been something that really, really, really necessitated and was thoughtful and was discussed and agreed upon.
Mm-hmm.
But that, I would say, is a once every 2 years kind of thing,
Right.
just a real anomaly. Otherwise, I'm really strict. And similarly, this goes back to that abundance mindset. If somebody really wants to see me at a time that I don't have, I will say no. Either,
Yeah.
hey, let's be creative. What about your lunch break? Can you go in later this day? What about leaving earlier? And if it's not going to work, that's fine. that's okay. That's also part of it in terms of finding fit.
Yeah, because I think like you mentioned you can it's convenient for the people on the East Coast because their after hours are yours. I mean, what's 3 hours? Yeah. So sorry,
Mhm.
my sister lives in LA and then my other sister used to live in DC. So I was like, how do y'all like talk to each other during normal day hours? But anyways, that concept of like, okay, I can still see certain people after 5 their time or 6 their time because it's only 3 o'clock my time, but then LA people, they really are stuck to your LA time
Yep.
zone schedule.
Yep. And
But
I will, I'm
it's
sorry.
kind of more some of the other things that you like the lawyers maybe not so much, but like I think you work with tech professionals or people in tech and then like film industry people. That seems like it's a little more fluid in terms of
You know
hours.
what you would think, but it's actually the lawyers tend to have a lot of autonomy over their
Really?
schedule. They work a lot. And so they have to produce in a short amount of time. But they tend to be really good about, you know, Thursdays at 11 a.m.
Hmm.
That's the
That's their
time,
time.
and they can block it out and work around that because a lot
Yeah.
of what they do is sort of self-run and they kind of handle their own schedules. And a lot of people also work from home certain days, and so they prefer certain days versus other days, or they'll take their lunch or whatever it might be. Film, interestingly enough, has been the trickier one, and it's fine. I can work with them
It's interesting.
because when they're on, they're on. And
Oh
so
yeah.
if, let's say,
But they
something
have like
gets
schedules, right? Like depending on if they're doing a movie or like a
a
show or
TV show, or so either, like, for example, if they're working nights, they don't want to see you at a.m.
right,
because
because they're
they've
up all
just got
night. Yeah.
home at 6 in the morning. So
That's interesting.
so depending on whatever it is that they're doing, or if they have one project, they need this time, and then 8 weeks later they need something
They'll
different.
kind of
So
shift.
that actually tends to be a little bit trickier, but all I ask when, again, in that initial consultation, and we sort of talk about not just fit, but also scheduling, I just ask that someone just be proactive and communicative in terms of what's happening. I've worked with some of my film folks for a long time, and it's fine. And if they have a project that's shooting and we can't make it work, okay, so maybe right now we'll decrease frequency for a little bit, or if I have an opening, again, we can figure something out.
Yeah, that's cool. I think that that's really important, especially for people in those jobs that are like, I need something, but I don't have the time to find it. But maybe they do
Exactly.
if they don't have to come in. They can just like
Exactly.
So
find a
you
space.
you have your non-negotiable work hours and you have your non-negotiable family hours. How are
Yep.
you avoiding burnout?
Yeah.
So I am a morning gym person. That's kind of the way I start my day. I have my quiet cup of black coffee before I go work out. I'm home. I get the kids to school. I see my clients. I'm done with my clients. I take a lot of time to spend with, again, my husband, my family, travel. I love gardening. We have some roses. And for those of you who ever have had roses, I never had before, they're great for therapists because the way that you make roses bloom is by pruning them often. And so
Yeah.
if I've had a session where I'm just like, oh man, that was so much, I'll go and just like trim, trim,
Take it
trim my
out on those
roses.
rose bushes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Rose
Wow.
bushes just blooming.
That's
So
amazing. All right. Key to
that's a good
success
one.
right there.
Yeah,
Printing roses.
exactly.
All right. So
Baking, cooking, all that kind of stuff.
does your husband also work from home? Like, are you both there at the same time? Yeah.
Often,
My
yes.
husband is too. It's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, and I tend to be, because my hours are really set and I tend to be pretty organized, look at his calendar, look at my calendar. We usually have a, hey, what does your day look like? What does my day look like? Great, great. Okay.
Yeah. So normally we kind of wrap these up with like an ending, but because you're in LA, I want to talk a little bit about the fires, and stuff like that and how that's looked for, your job, if that's impacted your job. I don't know. I know some of the areas where it is, like we have some really good friends who lost their house in Altadena. But then my sister who lives, in La Crescenta she's fine. So, it's just kind of situational, but has that Has that impacted your job yet, or yes, no?
Yes, yes. So I would say certainly, anybody who's lost their home or has been evacuated and, has had significant damage on their home, whatever it might be. Of course, those folks are dealing with some real big loss, and they
Yeah.
need to figure that stuff out. Just yesterday I met with some colleagues, and we have a consultation group, and that was a lot of what we talked about, was how we are living here, and we all had to think about, like, did we need to evacuate in our own homes and our own lives, and kind of figuring out what the healthy kind of boundary is between holding stuff for someone else, but then also having the wildfires impact us directly as well. So it has shaped sessions. It's really been lovely because all of my DC clients are like, "Are you okay? How
Yeah.
are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm good. Let's talk about you, but
Yeah,
thank you
we
for
reached out
checking."
to all of our California people and they all were okay, but it was like that was where their focus was right now. It was like kind of we have to put some efforts into this now.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say, for a lot of folks, it was a huge stressor, even if they were fine, even if their homes were fine. And it brought up, maybe some familial issues or relational issues, or a lot of kind of more existential. Do I want to stay at this job that I hate when, I could have lost my, like,
Kind of like a reality check, I guess.
yeah. So it was forced a lot of more serious introspection for clients, I would say globally, even putting aside, if obviously assuming that they were fine otherwise.
Yeah, that's so I was wondering about that. You're the first LA person we've talked to on these calls since the fires. We have a couple more that are coming on like next week and the week after that. So I'm just curious, like what as it kind of I don't know where things are at, but as it's kind of shifting and hopefully kind of calming down and people are
Mhm.
kind of getting their bearings again and assessing literally what they're going to do if they lost
Totally.
it's just I'm just curious like
Yeah.
how
And I think in some ways it's kind of a citywide forced introspection, in the way that, if you have the death of a friend or the death of a parent or just some significant loss, forces you to wonder, like, to take stock of, what am I doing with my life? Is this what I want? Is this the relationship I want to be in? Is this the job I want to have? Is the career I want? Like, so I think it has mostly done that for people
yeah,
in
I think
terms
that
of, yeah, forced introspection. But I don't know anybody, but either personally or even any clients, who don't know someone who lost their homes.
yeah,
Like,
I mean it's
everybody's been impacted.
wild. I mean it was very like yeah, like a reality check because like obviously we're not in California, we live in Tennessee, but like our friends had just moved back, like they were getting their house ready, like they had a familial house from like I don't know, years and years and years, been in their family, and then they have a chimney. Their chimney is the only thing left. So it was just like, wow. I mean, it can happen.
Yeah, and the other piece of it too is that, I saw a family, some friends not too long ago, where their house was fine, but their neighbors' homes were gone. And so there's a lot of guilt with that as well.
Gosh, yeah.
And then for people who maybe grew up in one of those areas, and like a lot of memories are gone. So
Yeah.
it's been hitting people in lots of different ways. Absolutely. I mean, I can't imagine it wouldn't impact anybody
Yeah.
in the area.
Sure.
Yeah. And I think even not in the area, like it's just been kind of
Absolutely.
like a,
Absolutely.
big thing. Well, this was awesome. Thank you so much for being on
My
our little
pleasure.
YouTube video podcast thing. I don't know fully what to call it, but yeah. So if any of you live in LA or apparently DC and you're lawyers or you have lawyer friends that are driving you nuts, Yael's a good person to have them talk to.
My
But and
pleasure.
in the tech and film industry, which I think is fascinating. We
Yeah.
could have talked about that for forever,
We
but
really could.
yeah, so we really
Another
appreciate
video.
it. We really appreciate it and talking to you about your journey to this and picking
Thank
your
you.
brain.
It was great being here.
All right, well, until next time, we'll talk to you guys later.
Thank you so much.
Bye.